The chainsaw sat untouched in the shed, chain rusting orange in the September air. Wendell Castleberry walked past it every morning without a glance. Instead, he carried a 5-gallon bucket toward a pen made of chicken wire and cedar posts, steam rising off feed mash in the cold. 60 turkeys rushed the fence, gobbling, wings beating dust into the low sun. He talked to them low, the way some men talk to hound dogs. Behind him, 60 acres of prime oak and shortleaf pine stood untouched, marked with orange survey ribbon that had been fluttering there since June. A logging truck idled at the end of his gravel drive, engine ticking. The foreman leaned out the window, hollering that the offer wouldn't hold past the month. Wendell didn't answer. He latched the pen gate, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked toward the house without looking back. $200,000 gone unclaimed, while he fed birds that wouldn't fetch a tenth of that come slaughter. Neighbors driving past slowed their trucks just to shake their heads. What kind of man turns down that kind of money to raise turkeys nobody around here even eats? If you're new here, welcome. I tell these true stories of folks the world wrote off too early, and I'd love it if you join us for the next one. Drop a comment and let me know what county or country you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and it's what keeps this channel going. Custer County, Arkansas, sits where the Ozark foothills give way to flatland, all gravel roads and creek bottoms, the kind of place where the nearest stoplight is 11 miles off. The town of Locust Bend had one feed store, one Baptist church, and a courthouse with peeling white columns older than anyone's memory. Wendell had farmed there his whole life, same as his father and his father's father, on land thick with timber that a paper mill 3 counties over had wanted for years. That spring, the trouble found him quiet, the way trouble in farm country usually does, not with a phone call, but with an envelope. The county tax office had sent notice, 4 years behind, and if the balance wasn't settled by the second week of November, the land would go up on the courthouse steps at public auction. Wendell read it twice at the kitchen table, then folded it into his shirt pocket like it might disappear if he didn't look at it again. His wife, Verna, kept the numbers in a marbled composition book she wouldn't let anyone else touch. She'd sit at the table after supper, adding columns by lamplight, mouth pressed thin. Their daughter, Opaline, 13 and sharp as a tack, used to sit across from her mother doing homework, half listening to the sums. She remembered the night her mother closed the book, set down her pencil, and said nothing at all, which scared Opaline worse than any shouting ever could have. The logging offer came 2 weeks after that envelope, like the timber company had been circling, waiting on hard times to soften a stubborn man. $200,000, cash at signing, to clear-cut 60 acres his grandfather had planted seedlings on by hand. Enough to pay the taxes twice over and still have money left. Cordell Hasty, who farmed the section next door, told him outright at the feed store that a man who turned down money like that with the tax man circling had gone soft in the head, or worse. Instead, Wendell drove 2 hours to a hatchery outside Fayetteville and came home with 60 turkey poults packed in cardboard boxes, peeping in the truck bed the whole way. Not the broad-breasted white birds raised in barns by the thousand, but a heritage breed, Bourbon Reds, deep rust and bronze feathered, birds that still knew how to fly and forage same as their wild cousins. He'd read about them in a farming journal Verna kept from a library sale, dog-eared at a page about heritage poultry, fetching premium prices from specialty buyers back east. Verna didn't argue when the boxes came off the truck. She'd learned, 22 years married, that arguing with Wendell once his jaw was set only wasted breath. But she did ask, plain and quiet, how 60 turkeys were supposed to outrun a tax auction that $200,000 could have settled twice over with room to spare. Wendell didn't have a clean answer. He just said the land wasn't his to sell off in pieces, and turkeys, at least, a man could grow back. He built the brooder house himself out of scrap lumber and a wood stove salvaged from his uncle's barn, keeping the poults at 95 degrees the way the journal instructed, checking the thermometer at 2 in the morning like a man checking on a sick child. Opaline took to nomming them, which Wendell pretended to discourage and secretly didn't mind at all. By July, the birds were feathered out and ranging the pasture behind the house, and word had gotten around Locust Bend that Wendell Castleberry had gone and turned his back on real money to play at raising fancy chickens. Shug Elder, who ran the feed store and had known Wendell since grade school, tried to talk sense into him one Saturday morning while ringing up a sack of scratch grain. Told him straight that specialty turkey buyers were a Yankee notion, that nobody in 3 counties would pay double for a bird that looked the same roasted, and that a man with a tax deadline bearing down had no business betting the family land on a novelty. Wendell just nodded along, paid for his feed, and drove home without a word of argument, which worried Shug more than any shouting match would have. August brought the first real trouble. A stretch of 90-degree days without rain dried the pasture to straw, and heat stress took 4 birds in a single week despite every precaution Wendell knew to try. He found the last one in the corner of the run at dawn, wings spread flat against the dirt, and stood there a long moment before he picked it up. That same week, a letter from the county clerk's office moved the auction date up 10 days, citing a backlog of properties needing processed before year's end. 2 blows landing inside of 6 days. That night Wendell sat on the porch steps long after Verna had gone to bed, turkeys settled and quiet in their pen, the tax notice folded soft with handling in his shirt pocket. Opaline came out in her nightgown and sat beside him without a word, the way she'd taken to doing when the house felt heavy. He didn't tell her everything would be fine, because he wasn't sure it would. He told her the birds still needed feeding come morning regardless, and that a man who quit halfway never found out what the second half held. He rigged shade cloth over the run the next day, hauled water twice a day instead of once, and moved the flock to a shadier stretch of pasture near the creek. The remaining 56 birds pulled through the worst of the heat, growing heavier and glossier through September, their tail feathers fanning out bronze and copper in the evening light. Wendell started making calls from the kitchen phone in the evenings, working a list of restaurant buyers and specialty grocers clipped from that same farming journal, most of whom had never heard of Locust Bend, Arkansas, and said so plainly. 2 buyers finally answered. One a farm-to-table restaurant outside Little Rock, the other a butcher shop in Fayetteville, both willing to pay a premium for heritage birds come Thanksgiving, but neither ready to commit real numbers until closer to the holiday. It wasn't enough yet to cover the tax bill outright, not with the auction date looming 10 days sooner than before, but it was more than turkeys nobody around here would eat, and Wendell wrote both names careful in Verna's composition book like they were something worth holding onto. By late October, the flock had filled out heavy and handsome, 60 pounds of bronze feather moving as one across the pasture at dusk. Cordell Hasty still shook his head every time he drove past, and the men at the feed store had taken to calling it Castleberry's Folly, loud enough to be sure it carried. Wendell kept working his phone list in the evenings, kept hauling feed at dawn, and kept that folded auction notice in his shirt pocket. 3 days now from a date he couldn't move and didn't yet have the money to answer. The radio was playing low in the kitchen on a Tuesday morning in early November when the news broke through the static. A commercial poultry operation 2 states over had confirmed an outbreak of avian influenza, forcing the culling of nearly 2 million birds inside a single week. Verna set down her coffee cup. Wendell stood in the doorway with his boots half-laced, listening as the announcer read supplier names he recognized from every grocery store flyer in the state, all of them suddenly short on birds 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, with no time left to replace them. By Thursday, his kitchen phone was ringing before the sun came up. The restaurant outside Little Rock called first, asking to double their order and lock the price before anyone else got to him. Then the Fayetteville butcher called, then a grocer from a chain Wendell had never even bothered contacting, all of them chasing the same scarce supply of birds untouched by the outbreak. Verna stood at the counter writing numbers into her composition book faster than Wendell could read them off the phone, her pencil pressing hard enough to nearly tear the page. By Saturday, 3 trucks sat idling in the Castleberry driveway at once, drivers leaning against tailgates with cash offers and signed order sheets, waiting their turn. Cordell Hasty drove past slow, same as always, but this time he pulled in behind the last truck and sat there a long moment before getting out. He walked the fence line looking at the birds same way he had all summer, except now his eyes kept drifting to the trucks, the buyers, the sheer number of hands reaching for a bird he'd spent 6 months calling a foolish notion. By the following week, word had traveled the whole county the way news does when it's got real money attached, through the feed store, the church parking lot, the counter at the diner. Folks who'd never given Wendell Castleberry more than a passing nod started pulling into his drive asking after birds he no longer had to sell, the flock already spoken for twice over. Shug Elder stood in his own doorway one evening watching another truck pull out loaded, and allowed to his wife that he might have been wrong about the Yankee notion after all. Wendell drove to the courthouse 3 days before the auction date with a cashier's check folded into his shirt pocket where the tax notice used to ride. The clerk counted it out slow, stamped the paper twice, and told him the Castleberry land was clear through next year. He stood on those peeling white steps a moment afterward, hat in his hands, looking out over a town square he'd walked 1,000 times, feeling the strange lightness of a debt finally set down. That Thanksgiving, the Castleberry table held a turkey same as anyone's, though a smaller one, since the rest had gone out to buyers 3 counties wide. Opaline said grace and thanked God for birds, which made everybody laugh for the first time in months. Out past the porch light, the pasture sat empty and quiet, 60 acres of oak and pine still standing untouched behind it, marked with survey ribbon nobody had bothered to take down, and nobody, as far as Wendell was concerned, ever would. The land held, the timber stood, and the ribbon marking it for the mill finally came down the following spring, not cut away by a saw, but untied by Wendell's own hand, and coiled up neat in a drawer, like something he'd decided he was done needing.